Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Engaging Employees Through Better Email Design. I'm just going to give just a minute for some people to join. I see we already have a lot of people coming in, so that's great. We'll get started pretty promptly because it's going to be a information-packed webinar that we have today. All right, I think that gives us a little bit of time. So thank you all for joining us today. In this webinar, we're going to be sharing data-backed best practices and practical design tips to help you create clear, engaging messages that capture attention and drive action. You'll leave with proven strategies to make your communications more impactful, efficient, and confident. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This session is being recorded and you will receive a copy of the recording after the presentation. You'll also receive a copy of our design guide. Microphones are muted, but you can use the Q&A function to ask questions, and we'll be checking this periodically throughout the presentation for questions, and then at the end as well. And we did ask registrants to include any questions with their registration. So I'll be sprinkling those questions in throughout our presentation. One question that came up that I think is very fitting to get us started is employees say that they did not see information in the newsletter. So how can design help our employees focus on what's important for them to know? So joining me today is our UX designer, Ian Ball, and he's going to get us started and he's going to help answer that question for us.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Hi, everyone. That's actually a great question to start this webinar on, right? Because it's essentially what we're going to be going over today is how can we utilize that email design to sort of organize our content, right, in order of importance, right, to drive engagement with that sort of hierarchical structure. So that's perfect. So great first question. So yeah, hello, everybody. I am Ian Ball. Feel free to call me Eyeball. I'm a UX UI designer here at Polite Mail Software, and also the head of PageWorthy, which is sort of the custom email design arm of Polite Mail. So welcome. Why are we here today, right? Why does email design even matter? Why not just blast out a text-based email to your mailing list with some links and get some engagement that way? Well, I'm sure you have. But in my experience, a well-designed email really does set into motion a kinetic chain of events here, right? All beginning with just capturing that initial attention, right, in a crowded inbox, right? Capturing that visual attention. A well-designed email just has a ability to guide focus, right, to all your key messaging within your content and the links within that key messaging, which in turn boosts clicks and engagement, and ultimately will support your business goals too, right, with that clear action. And at the end of the day, a well-designed email is just a fun, just visually interesting way to organize your content for the recipients. All right, a few considerations, right, before you even begin to structure out your email design. One being audience considerations, right? This is pretty obvious, right? But who are you sending this to, right? And what information is most important to them and ultimately the business, right? Accessibility, this is a big one, right? As an email designer, you want to make sure everybody can read your email message, obviously. So regardless of disability, device, environment, etc., right? So, and this will really come down to your images and your use of alt text with those images, your use of background colors and the foreground text, right? And the contrast between those two, and your text sizing. And then content, right? Email content is king. So you're going to want to start to gather all of that relevant content for your messaging, all your images, all your text headers, all your body text, your links, your buttons, right? All of that relevant content for the email message into one place so you can just start organizing it out in order of importance, right? Okay. Melissa, did we have a question on this one? I think we did, right?
Yes, we did.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
that's
So
okay.
yeah, we had a registration question that said, is it better to keep the same templates across all communications, or does switching things like the header do more to engage employees? We have a header we use for all comms, but thought about switching it out for workshops, other teams, etc.
Yeah, this is perfect for it. Reminded me of this, right? For desktop design, at PageWorthy, I build out what's called a master template a lot of times for newsletter redesigns. Just when they want to, it's not performing well, it's not getting enough engagement, or they want a new look and feel, right? More professional look and feel. So I'll build out a master template. Essentially, what that is, it's just a layout, right, that drives engagement, right? That won't change from send to send, but the content will change, right? And they can use that master template to send to different departments, right? So if you already have a header that's geared toward that department, it's tailored to them, absolutely should be switching that out for send, right? Because it goes back to the audience I just touched on, right? Who will you be sending this to, right? And what information is most important to them. So if you already have a header that's tailored to that audience, absolutely swap that out each time. And with a master template, you can even create submasters, right? So you don't have to swap it out. So it's a great question. But speaking of desktop design, so I always begin my email designs in desktop mode. I just love the blank canvas it gives me. And it also allows me to utilize those multi-column layouts, right? When I'm laying out the content in order of importance, right? The multi-column layouts really do allow me to maintain that clear hierarchy you want in the content sections for that engagement, right? And that's where you want to drive that engagement, right? That primary above the fold, right? Primary area right there, right? And wherever you want to drive that engagement, you also want to have that primary call to action button, right? Right there for your main story, and just make that visually appealing. So as I'm starting out my desktop design, right, and I'm just going row by row, and essentially a lot of email builders will do it that way, right, top down from. So it's great in order of importance to do it that way. Polite Mail has a template builder that uses that. So I'll just start going row by row, right? And if I'm using a header row, I'll design and code that out, and then I'll begin on my lead story where I really want to drive that engagement. And immediately I will send a test. You need to test a lot on your design. So I'll just build out a couple rows and I'll send a test and I'll look at that on desktop, right? But as I'm building it out row by row and I'm doing my testing, I can't forget the responsive design, right? Like how will this desktop layout look when it hits that mobile design? And if it's opened up on mobile, right? Especially if you're using multiple columns, the typical behavior being, right, your left column is stable and your right column will stack beneath that on a mobile display, and there's your mobile hierarchy. So I'm thinking about that as I'm designing out on a desktop. And one other quick thing, just don't add too many calls to actions or links in your content messaging section. You want one or two primary calls to action for those sections. Too many links and you just start to get decision fatigue. So just keep it to one or two primary links in those sections. All right, so as I'm designing out my mobile design, my desktop design is looking good. I'm sending out my tests. I'm checking it on my inbox on desktop, and I'm also now checking on mobile, right? Because a lot of people are opening up on that mobile design. So you're definitely going to want to test a lot on mobile as you go. And one of the things I find when I start looking at the mobile design is I just need to watch for that padding and spacing adjustments I inevitably need to make, right? I just find that there's just a lot more padding than I would want, right? When I open it up on a mobile. Just mobile browsers have different defaults, right? So it's not one-to-one, right? So what could look perfect on my desktop design when I send that over to mobile and open it up, maybe there's just a little bit more white space there that needs some adjustment as I go to keep that, most of my key content above the scroll, right? So it's above the fold on a desktop design and above the scroll on a mobile design. The other thing you want to really make sure is that all your key images, right? These are the ones that are paired with your messaging throughout your content section, that all those images are going 100% when you do check out your mobile design on a phone, right? Whether it's they're reading vertically or horizontally, that those images are going 100% and just stretching to fit regardless of the phone width, right? And you're going to want to use media queries to do this, right? Just to So if it's a fixed pixel width on my desktop design, or maybe even doubled up, right, for a Retina display, when it hits that phone, that fixed pixel width should go 100% to stretch to fit on the phone. And you can use those media queries in your code, or you could utilize a software service like Polite Mail. So as long as the email's tracked through Polite Mail, it'll be fully responsive when it hits the phone. And yeah, the other really thing, the key thing to keep in mind here is just trying to have as much of your key information where you really want to drive that engagement above the scroll on a mobile device. And that includes your call to action button too, if you can get it up there, ideally. Yeah, and just make sure that call to action button on your mobile is large enough, right, and finger friendly. So one thing to keep in mind too is you're building out your desktop and you're sending it over to mobile, you're doing your testing, is just don't assume that your desktop, especially if you're using multiple columns, right, that display will automatically stack correctly when it goes to the mobile single column. So you're gonna have to test that, and you're gonna have to utilize media queries for that too, right? And it should be pretty easy to tell, right? You send that test, let's say it's a 3-column row that I'm building out, and it hits the phone and is 3-column on the phone. Well, it's not stacking correctly, it's not fully mobile responsive. And it basically just takes the code and squishes it into a mobile display, and that's no bueno. So your text is small, your links are small, your buttons are small, and your engagement will be small. All right.
And there was another question here,
Yes, I
so
thought
I'll
I
ask it at the
thought there
beginning
was
because I
on the
think you're going
list.
to answer it in this slide. How can we make emails more visually interesting without negatively impacting accessibility?
Okay, that's a great question. I get that a lot of the times in my redesign, and luckily we're going over a few of these in the bullet points. So that's why I want to prompt Melissa on this. There's a few ways to do that, right? That shouldn't really necessarily affect accessibility too much, right? But you are going to want to be choosing visually interesting images that go well with your key content, right? And along with that, in terms of accessibility, you're going to want to add that descriptive alt text for any key images that you're using in your design, right? So if the image doesn't download for some reason, or it's blocked by the email client, it still has that descriptive text on it, right? And it'll still make sense in the overall email itself, right? So choose your images wisely. And another big thing for this to gain some visual interest that I use all the time are background colors. I love background colors. I use them all the time. They're great for call out sections, right? Or if I want to highlight a key section with a subtle background, background on a footer, right? But when you're using background colors in terms of accessibility, you always just want to keep in mind, be mindful of the foreground text, right? And the contrast between those two for readability. And you can use an online contrast checker for that. Super simple. Just plug in your background color text hex, your foreground color text hex for your foreground text, and just see if it passes that accessibility contrast checker. If it does, you're good to go. So, and I think we're going to be sending a link to an online contrast checker at the end of this webinar. And the other big thing is your text sizing, right? Again, you want everybody to be able to read your message. So you want a minimum of about 14 pixels for your body text, right? And then a minimum of about 20 pixels for your headers. And in terms of visually interesting thing, you can also use headers for this, right? That hierarchy of text sizing. So the headers are the biggest, obviously. And if you maybe put in a color for those headers to make them pop on the page, that'll really help as well. But just keep in mind with your text that you're using for your messaging, you're just going to want to be using just clear, legible fonts for all your body text, right? And that's preferably a sans serif font. I would stay away from any company funky custom fonts in your messaging. I have used them in designs in the past, but limit them to headers, right? So I'll make a custom font header. I'll make that into an image, right? And I'll use that as an image header. And then the rest of the body is just sans serif fonts.
Came in before we move to the next slide. How many images are recommended without affecting the content?
That really depends on the length of your email, right? But you want to keep it around 1-to-1 for stories, right? So if you've got 5 key stories that you want to drive engagement to, then add 5 images, but just keep the image size low, right? Because you don't want to weigh down the overall size of the email. But you want to keep the overall size around under a meg. So I would say 1-to-1 on your key stories, right? If you start getting into more resource areas, things like that, you don't need images for that. Text-based and links are fine for that.
Thanks, Anne.
All right. Speaking of sans serif fonts, here's just a list of web-safe sans serif fonts, right? So all these fonts here in this list are pre-installed on everybody's machine. So you can rest assured that they will appear as expected in the inbox. Sans serif fonts are just easier to read, right? And they're easier to scale. And for digital display, they are optimal. So just stick with a sans serif, right? Arial being the king. Everybody loves Arial. And like I said before, content is king, right? I could build you and design you the most beautiful layout you've ever seen. But if your content is poor, then your engagement will be poor. We've seen it over and over, right? So the engagement in your email is primarily measured by the content being communicated to the recipients, not the design. And if content is king, consistency is definitely queen. And this could be consistency in layout too, right? A consistent layout just maintains that predictable visual rhythm from send to send, and that can really help with engagement as well. And consistency can also be timing too, sorry. So by sending a consistent day and time, employees just build that reading habit, right? And that really helps with engagement as well. All right, so talking a lot about content. Content is king. What is content, right? So email content begins even outside of the design itself, right? With the subject line and that preview text. So you really want to take your time to craft a clear, direct, concise subject line for your open rates. And then it couples well, right, with that preview text. That's that little line of text right below the subject line that just sort of describes the email messaging in one sentence or two. You just really want to, again, craft a clear, concise, relevant preview text to describe the email to get those open rates. Obviously, your body copy, this is super important, right? This is your main messaging. I was a journalism major for a while back in college, way back. And they were always stressing word economy, right? Keep it short. So who, what, where, when, why. So just like a newspaper, email messaging is the same way. Keep it nice and short and get to the point in your body copy, nice and direct. And along with that is the calls to action, right? These are your buttons, your links. They're going to tell the reader what to do next, obviously, right? But you want to use action-oriented calls to action for that, right? Not just read more, learn more, right? I remember there was one time I got a mock-up, an email design, right? It's beautiful email design from a third-party design agency, and every single link and every single button was a read more. You need to take this webinar. So, and then your visuals, right? These are obviously all your images, your graphics, your animated GIFs, your video thumbnails. These are going to support and enhance your main messaging, so they're really important. And then I call it secondary content. Still content though, it's the decorative, right? Your logos, your colors, your fonts, just the overall look and feel of the email that should ideally match the overall look and feel of the company.
Oh, and another question that we had, in a company where email is not seen to be an effective way of communicating, how can we convince executives, especially with better email design? So I'll answer this one and I'll say that
Okay.
leadership loves data. So if you use a tool like Polite Mail, you can show your execs how the design choices you make impact employee engagement with messages. And you can test out different ways to organize your content and see what gets better results based on what the data is telling you as far as read times, overall engagement with the message, whether or not people are clicking on links based on where those are located within the message. And so Ian's going to talk a little bit more about that and how we recommend to organize your content.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. So we've talked a lot about content, what it is, how to get it, how to organize it, but how do we lay it out, right, and start designing that content? That really depends on where you want to drive the engagement, right? There's a lot of ways you can do it, but every email you've ever seen in your entire life is essentially a variation of a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4 column layout. That's it. Now, there are many, obviously, variations within that, but every email is essentially that 1, 2, 3, 4 column layout. So it really depends on where you and how you want to use that to drive engagement, right? So this first example design I did, I really wanted to drive the engagement into one of those first 3 buckets. So I used a 3 column right up top at the beginning of the email in that preview pane to drive engagement into one of those 3 areas. And then just a lead story beneath that with a hero image coupled with a nice headline, a little bit of messaging, and a primary call to action. And I believe that hero image, a lot of that would be above the fold as well. Second example here is more of a simple, this is a shorter email, just like save the date, right? So a 1 column hero image up top with a 1 column header right below that, coupled to just grab that attention in the inbox, right? And you could even flip those if you want. And then beneath that, a 2 column, right, with a 2/3 column messaging on the right and 1/3 column messaging on the left, with that main call to action being that, add to calendar icon, right? And that would be above the fold as well. And then the third design here was just sort of playing around with different column layouts with a 3 column header, right? Nice and thin, going back to that padding. We don't want too much padding on mobile. So a thin header, 3 column, and below that for my lead story, a 2 column, right? With a 2/3 column image on the right and a 1/3 text column on the left with a little background color and my main call to action in that column. And also thinking about mobile, right? Like I said, as I'm designing out my desktop, always thinking about how it's going to stack in mobile. So I want my main call to action, that left column, to be right up front on the phone, and then the image would stack beneath that on a phone. And then beneath that, just playing around with some 3 column layouts for the sub stories, right? So taking down that padding to 0, so all the images sort of stack right up against each other, and using some background colors and foreground text, checking contrast, with just a short messaging and 1 link for each section. So you can see, could you really play around with the different layouts and where you want to drive your engagement, right?
One question that came in, can images or visuals be hyperlinked? And I can answer that. Yes, absolutely. They can be hyperlinked. That is a great idea, especially if you have like a video placeholder image and you want to link to where a video is hosted and still be able to see, if you use a tool like Polite Mail, how many people have clicked to view that video.
Right. Yeah. So in this design, exactly, I would have linked all of these sub stories, maybe even the main story as well. Yeah, it's just one more link to get them to engage with. So absolutely. All right, so some newsletter sizing. I do most of what I do at PageWorthy are newsletter redesigns. Do a lot of those; are very popular. And at Polite Mail, our standard width for a newsletter or any email is 640 pixels. You're going to want to pick between 600 and 700 pixels for an email width. It just ensures that proper display across email clients, right? You won't get any of that horizontal scroll if you stay within there. And that's coupled really well with the height and the length of that, right? And that's the above the fold we keep talking about, right? That's where you want to keep your main newsletter messaging. And another thing to keep in mind when designing out newsletters, They tend to get long. They tend to get busy, right? Because a newsletter tends to hit a lot of different departments in one send. So it can really start to get pretty long and the images can start to pile up in a newsletter. So just be mindful of that and try and keep your image sizes down if possible. And again, under 1 MB would be the goal there. And then just for newsletter width, just always keep in mind if you're using multiple column variants, just how that is going to look on a mobile responsiveness, right? When it adapts to that single column layout.
A few other questions have come in. Our organization has 20,000 employees and we send out a weekly newsletter with 40 plus articles. We separate the newsletter with headlines with specific content type and or audiences. Do you have an example of this type of newsletter? And I would add, or any kind advice on how to structure that?
Yeah, with a newsletter like that, you do want to separate that with header rows. So I think on a few slides back, we had one that was sort of doing that, and it could speak to, yeah, this one here, right? So on the left here, right, where you've got that background header that separates, that's how I would essentially separate from department to department. But I would sometimes advise against that, right? I would almost want to break those up into individual newsletters rather than trying to combine everything into one newsletter. It just gets really busy and really hard to read all that content. So ideally, I would suggest that you break that up into individual newsletters and send directly to those departments.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk later on about the data in terms of how long your message should be. And so what I'm going to share kind of supports breaking that up into separate newsletters.
Right.
We also have in our best practices guide recommendations to target your content to specific audiences. So that would be a good reason to separate those emails out as well, to send them like to each individual department directly.
Mm-hmm. All right, speed up a couple.
And we have one
Skip
other
this one.
question. In these examples of a company newsletter, would you keep the subject line company newsletter every week or change it up every time?
No, you're definitely going to want to change that up, right, Melissa? I mean, you
Yep.
really want your target exactly. You want to describe in the subject line exactly what the newsletter is, what's in the messaging, right? So
Yep.
any sort of general subject line is no bueno.
Yep, exactly. Agreed.
And then this is just a quick slide. If you're using full width text rows, studies show the best sizing for that is around 75 characters, and that's with spaces for readability, and it averages out to about 10 words per line, right? So if you are using that full text row layout, you're going to want to try to keep that around 10 words per line for readability. If you keep your email within that 600 to 700 width and with padding and text sizing big enough, you should be fine with that. But if you start experimenting with wider designs, which I've done lately and I love, if you're just keep in mind, for those, full width text rows, you still want to keep it around 10 words per line, right? It's just harder when it starts getting longer and you start reading left to right, when you get to the end of that long line, it's just hard to pick up where that second line picks up. So try to keep it around 10 words per line for full text rows. All right, I think you're going to speak on some data points of long emails versus short emails, right, Melissa?
Yep. And the data that I'm going to be presenting comes from our 2024 benchmark report, where we analyze our customers' anonymized data. And in 2024, we looked at 4.8 billion internal emails sent to over 12 million employees worldwide. So we take that data and then we put it into Power BI and create some charts and graphs that I'm going to show you coming up. And this may be a topic that you discuss with your team and other teams that maybe try to get you to send communications on their behalf. But how much email should you send? So with this data point, we wanted to look at if there was a difference in frequency sent by message size. And so we divided message size into 3 even buckets. Short emails are up to 1.3 minutes. Medium emails are 1.3 to 2.4 minutes, and long emails are longer than 2.4 minutes. And you'll see as frequencies go up, particularly once you're over 1 time per week, the read rates go down, but they go down more aggressively for longer messages and not as much for the shorter messages. So if you have to send high frequency messages, make sure to keep them shorter. We see an increase in the readership on the very short messages when you go from 1 per day to more than 1 per day, which tells us that employees have a capacity to process a lot of emails as long as they're short. And that tall bar that you see in the middle shows that most communications are coming from an address to a specific audience more than once per week. So besides sending shorter emails, if you use a variation of different from email addresses, that would also produce better results. Some pros and cons of short email newsletters. Pros, obviously, they're quick to read. They're more mobile friendly and easier to scan. There's focus on a single call to action. And you generally get higher engagement rates and click-throughs, and of course, easier for you to produce consistently. The cons, however, there is limited space if you are trying to explain a complex idea or story, which in turn may feel thin if your audience is expecting depth, and you have fewer opportunities for multiple calls to action. Pros and cons of long email newsletters. Pros, they're good for in-depth stories. You could include multiple topics or sections. You can build authority and thought leadership when the content value is high, and you can engage highly committed readers who want more detail. However, with the cons, you have a higher risk of losing readers. They're harder to scan, especially on mobile. They do require strong formatting, and as someone mentioned in the Q&A, for a long message, we would recommend using anchor links, accordions, or tabs for longer emails, but that can pose challenges in accessibility. And of course, it's going to take you more time and effort to write and design those emails. And here are just some tips based on specific newsletter type. So for example, if you have a quick update or announcement, we recommend keeping it between 50 to 150 words, keeping it snappy, 1 to 2 paragraphs with a clear headline and a single call to action. On the other hand, if you're telling a story or a case study within the email, you can have it between 400 and 700 words. You're going to be building context and narrative, but still make sure to break the text into readable sections, and include quotes, images, or highlights. So you can read through this when we send that out, but a lot of different newsletter types with specific recommendations here. And one of the questions we received during registration is, what's the best way to make people read your email? So our answer to that is to first make a good first impression. So why make a good first impression, and what does this mean? The why is because employees are already receiving so much content. On a monthly average, they're getting 16 email broadcasts, 52 minutes of content, and 170 links from their corporate communications or internal comms team. So you want to make sure that your email gets their attention. And you can make a good first impression with assets like personalization, editing the pre-header text, and including a strong, unique subject line. The first thing we want to look at to get the audience's attention is what from address the message is coming from. And I know this can be a main cause of send anxiety, as oftentimes communicators are writing emails on behalf of leadership. But if you want to increase your readership and engagement, sending from a recognized leader will increase those chances. You'll see in this chart, we're looking at the to from combination sent from a specific address to a specific audience. And this chart shows that most communicators are sending from a mailbox. But when messages are sent from a person that isn't the communicator's name, you get an 8% increase in attention. And that's likely because those messages are coming from leadership names, so that gets attention. And we also broke out the analysis by frequency and found that with the same to/from combinations, sending more than once per week is the most common, but we saw better performance on less frequent emails. So you lose about 2% of readership every time you increase your frequency. So anytime you can send from a person, the data shows you'll get a better result. And the key, if you are using generic from addresses, is to have multiple. So more than one per week coming from the same from to address just doesn't perform as well, because that typically means that all of those messages are sent from a generic corp comms at email address, and everything is sent under that one address. So the way you can improve your readership and attention while still using a generic mailbox if you need to is to name the from address the newsletter name, and that would reduce the frequency from that address and increase the attention and readership given to those messages. Subject lines, as we received that question earlier, are another key to what people pay attention to. So nowadays, for most modern email clients, whether in Outlook or on mobile, subject lines are getting cut off somewhere between 40 to 50 characters. So you'll see that fits in within the first half of this chart. And then as you get to 7 to 8 words, those subject lines start to get cut off. So if you can keep them below 7 to 8 words, you'll have higher attention. And these were words in some of the most popular subject lines in 2024. So the top 20% email subjects from our benchmark report included keywords such as update, action, reminder, new, now, and news. These are just more attention-grabbing words that you could use in your subject lines. You also want to pay attention to what shows up in the preview pane for an email. So words matter more than banners at the beginning of the email, but 16 times more messages are sent with mostly image content, yet mostly text emails garner 8% more attention. And headline text matters more than images, and novelty matters. Make sure that you're different to capture their attention. But overall, it's good to use more images in the body of the email, so long as at the top of the email, you have a good text headline or call to action or intro paragraph rather than that big banner image. And these charts show the content breakdown in emails. So mostly text in the preview pane gets the highest attention rate, which is 8% more. But once you have your audience's attention and they're into the body of the email and reading, the more images, the better in terms of readership, 31% more. And this may be different than what a lot of communicators are doing. We see a lot of templates with big header images at the top, which has like the name of the newsletter in the header image. But you could accomplish the same thing by including the newsletter name in the from address and then putting what the message is about in the intro text instead of a header image. And you could have the header image down below that intro text. Pre-header text shows up in the Outlook preview pane along with the from address and subject line. And this gives the reader a sneak peek as to what the email is all about. If you have engaging pre-header text, this will get the reader's attention and get them into the body of the email to read further. So to sum it up, these are the components of an email that help make a good first impression. You have engaging pre-header text explaining what the email is about, a strong subject line. Personalization at the beginning of the message can make the message look like it's going directly to each individual. Showing the expected read time for the message at the top lets the reader know how long it will take to read the message. And if you use PoliteMail, we actually have a feature that calculates expected read time for you, and you can easily just plug that in. So now let's talk about how to structure the body of your email for the best results. This slide shows overall average recipient behavior. And so 64% is our average open rate. You should put your most important content at the top of the email. So within the first 30% of the email, or as Ian says, but above the fold, because
or the scroll.
The scroll, right. There it is.
Both. Hold
Yeah.
and the scroll on mobile.
Because people who open and of the people who open and don't ignore the message, 15% will just skim it. 38% will just reach that 30% threshold, and then 34% will read more than half. So in terms of structuring your email, what does the data say about length? Keep it short in terms of links within the email. So some people think that if they send a lot of links, they'll get a lot of clicks, but that's not what the data shows. The opposite is true. It's the same with clicks as it is for readership. The shorter the messages perform better. And as messages get longer, your click rates decrease. So this chart on the right shows the number of links within the email up to 20, the total number of clicks, which are the orange bars, and the click rate on top of that. So you'll see that the highest click rate happens at 6 links, but the bar on 2 links is double that bar for 6 links. So we're seeing more actual clicks happen when there are fewer links within the content. So if you really want someone to click, put the link at the top of the email and then again at the bottom of the email, and that's it. Now, long form can work, but short emails do get better results in terms of click-through rate. But if you have a long newsletter or other multi-link content, you can stick to between 6 to 9 links and still see a pretty good performance there. And someone in the registration questions asked about optimal email length for recipient engagement. So our recommendation based on the benchmark data is to shorten your body content as well. So keep it under 1 minute to read, which is about 250 words or less, if you can. As we've seen from doing our benchmark report for a few years, people's willingness, so the audience's willingness to give attention to content continues to go down. And shorter messages perform better, which you can see very clearly in these charts. But the good news is that most emails we're seeing being sent are short. But you see there are some messages that are 10 minutes and longer. We actually stopped tracking at 10 minutes for the sake of this presentation. But with every 250 words you add to your message, you're losing 10% of your readership, which that chart on the right really shows. So the sweet spot is in the beginning of that chart at 1 minute of content or less. It also takes you communicators a lot of time and effort to create a 2,500 word email. So that's another reason to keep your messages short. And you may wonder, are people really sending 10-minute, 2,500 word emails? Yes, they are, but best practice, again, would be to put the long form content on the intranet and then provide summary content and links to the long form content in the email. Now, I know a lot of companies don't have simple to use intranet pages, and the easiest thing to do is put the content in the email. And sometimes that works. The green bar isn't 0 minutes read for those 10-minute emails. So those emails are getting some reads, but that's not how people generally process email. So it's best to avoid it if you can, but we know sometimes there's no option. So again, if you absolutely need to send a long email, some options to improve readership are to summarize content in each section so people know where to jump to, or break up the message with color coding or white space so it's easier to scroll to the sections that they're looking for. So now I'm going to hand it back to Ian, and he's going to talk more about that content hierarchy.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we have been speaking a lot about visual hierarchy, right, in the email design, the email structure for engagement. At Pageworthy, which is part of PoliteMail, I will usually send out a few example layouts to clients just so they can go through and sort of pick which one they like, and I can brand it to their company. And this one is always a fan favorite, so I figured we would just use it to run through. It really does show some clear visual hierarchy pretty well, so we'll just run through this real quick. All right, so this one starts with a nice hero image, right? You want to keep in mind if you're using a hero image to grab that attention in the inbox, right? That you try to keep it thin, right? Because you don't want to use too much of that precious preview pane above the fold, as we keep saying. But a nice eye-grabbing hero image is what starts out this newsletter. And then obviously below that, it's coupled with a quick, bold headline that couples it. It speaks to the image itself, right? So much that it almost seems like it's part of the image itself. And you can even flip these, right? You could have the headline above the image if you'd like. And then just some quick messaging that we keep going, we keep talking about, right? That key messaging, and then coupled with that primary call to action, right? So that's really my lead story in this newsletter. That's where I want to drive engagement. And that call to action there, I even added capital letters, right? So it's clear that this is the primary call to action. If I was using more buttons down, further on down the email, I would not capitalize them. And then your sub stories, right? Same sort of rules apply where you want to find that engaging image to start with, right? Coupled with a nice subheader. So in terms of hierarchy, you want that subheader down a few pixels from your header, right? So you can visually see that that's the subheader right in a sub story. And then you can start adding your key messaging below that. So again, same sort of rules applies as your lead story. You want to get word economy, direct, right to the point to your readers, and they can engage with it if they want to learn more. All right, so now with the second column, right, you can really start to see this visual hierarchy coming together, right? It's starting to be really clear, like where is my lead story? Where do I want to drive engagement? And here are my sub stories beneath, right? One thing I quickly want to point out in your column layouts like this, you could see how on the left, the headline is dropping down into the subheadline is dropping down into 2 lines there. You want to match that, right, with any other column that you have, right? So just for that visual vertical spacing, you want that consistent, right? So you want them both on 2 lines. I wouldn't go beyond 2 lines. I would keep it to 1 or 2 lines for your subheaders. And I also use AI. You can use AI to do that, right? To shorten or lengthen your subheaders to get them to match up. And the same thing goes for your key messaging here, right? You can see how it's off a little bit. So as a designer, that drives me crazy. So one of the little tricks you can do is just pick a line, right? Let's say the 5th line in this key messaging, go to the end of that word and just add an ellipse and just delete all the rest of the text, right? Same thing with the right column, 5th line, last word, ellipses, delete the rest of the text, and then your call to action and everything will be vertically spaced perfectly, right? And you, again, you want to have that clear, purposeful call to action for every single call to action here. No read mores or learn mores. And then finally, a white space or a divider can really help to showcase this visual hierarchy, right? I use dividers all the time. They're great. Just even a subtle gray 1 pixel divider line is all you need, right? To break up that content into scannable sections when a reader is looking at the email as a whole. So those are great to use as well. And yeah, you just want to keep your hierarchy predictable, right? As you could see here in the final sort of preview pane look here, it's very clear the visual hierarchy in the stories and where we want to drive the engagement to go. And you can keep that predictable from send to send. All right, couple best practices for images, right? The main thing is you want to be choosing high quality images that grab attention, that couple with the messaging really well, right? That are bespoke to the actual content in the company, not general stock images, right? Full confession on this design here, I had to create all these images through AI, right? But that was just for business reasons. We needed not rights management, right? So they had to be rights free. So you could see you can still get great AI images if you prompt it well. But for your images and your messaging, you want them to really pair well with your messaging and be bespoke to the content itself. They should enhance it, not replace it, right? You want your messaging to be the main call to action and your photo to go along with that just for visual interest. Try to keep your file size down, right? Especially if you're using a lot of images like this design. Include that alt text, obviously, always for your key images, right? Test in dark mode, that's key. And then, if you're using a lot of images like this design, try to have a cohesive look, right? So for this design, I tried to, pick colors all from the same general color palette, right? That sort of have the same look and feel, that they all work together, right? So if you zoomed out on this email, right, and you could see it as a whole, or you printed it out, put it on the wall, it still made sense as a little work of art, right?
And we had a question about that previous slide about the sub headline, and we
Mm-hmm.
might touch on it later. We are definitely going to touch on AI in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
They just wanted to know, do you mean use AI to recommend a shorter sub headline? So do we recommend using AI to shorten the
Yeah,
subhead?
I don't mean use AI to write the subheadline. I mean, if your existing subheader, right, is dropping down to 3 lines and your other column is 2, you can ask AI to shorten up your current subheader, and it's usually pretty good with stuff like that. Or if you have a short headline, you need it to drop down to 2 headlines, to 2 lines, you can ask it to extend it. And it's usually pretty good. You can even give it a character count, and it'll stick to a character count too. So can utilize it that. But yeah, you definitely don't want AI writing your subheaders for you. Okay, so a text email design, these are great too, right? They're simple, they're informative, and you can make them beautiful, right? So, but the same rules apply, that you want to use make sure that everybody can read your email. So stay within that 14 to 16 for your body text messaging, and 20 to 24 for your headings, right? Headings are key for just text-based emails, because that's really what's going to break up the content. Use the sans serif fonts, right? That's key for a fully text-based email. And you want to maintain that high contrast, right? So I typically use a subtle background, like this design here has a subtle gray, right? And you just want to always check that contrast of the text on top of it. And by using a subtle background too, you can even use it to highlight your main story, right? By just this example here, just that white section there, it's very clear that's the main driving engagement area. That's your lead story, right? And just that little subtle spotlight change in color. That's all you need with a text-based email. But the same rules apply. Like I said, now the subsections beneath that, you want to keep those into scannable chunks, right? Divided by that horizontal rule, and it still has a great hierarchy to it, right? And you can also use bullet points for fully text-based newsletters too. Those are great for easy takeaways. All right, some best practices for links. We've mentioned these a bunch today. So if you have a primary call to action like this example here, right, you really want to place that up in the top, right? It's very clear what we want you to do with this email, right? Register now. So you want to place that right up at the top in the preview pane. If it gets longer, it's fine to repeat it later if it's longer. The other thing, if you're creating images for your buttons, for your calls to actions, I would advise against using all images, right? Again, in case they don't download or they're blocked or whatever. But you can use HTML table buttons. I use those all the time. They're great. And they will render across every single email client. You won't have to worry about it, right? It's just that background color with a foreground text, and just make sure there's a contrast there. And just make sure they're highly visual and bright, so people really know where to engage. And again, I keep stressing this, but action-oriented language, right? Like save my spot, not read more. And the other big thing with links is, just as Melissa mentioned, just don't want to use too many equal weight links, right, for decision fatigue. All right. In terms of videos and animated GIFs, I get this question a lot, right? Most of your email clients are not going to support just streaming video directly in the body of the email. I know that would be cool, but you're probably going to want to make video thumbnails for every single video you're linking out to, right? It just won't play within the email itself. So you want to take your time and craft those play buttons really well. Another thing I've noticed can help too is if you can, either in the video description somewhere in the text or in the messaging, if you could just note how long the video is, right, that they'll be clicking onto, that helps with engagement too. In terms of animated GIFs, I don't use them that often. I haven't seen them used that often, that often. So if you are going to use animated GIFs, I would keep them down around 1 MB, right? And this is where it gets hard, because as you start designing them, and if they're not under 5 seconds, they start to get really large, right? So they're hard to do well. And you don't want a really large image, especially if you're sending to a large mailing list, right? So Just be wary of using animated GIFs and make them subtle if you are going to use them at all. Like a simple looping down arrow for engagement might work. That would be pretty light. But if you are using an animated GIF somewhere in your design, just make sure that that first frame, whoever's designing the animated GIF, that first frame, right, still communicates the meaning of the image, right? Because a lot of email clients, when it hits the inbox, it'll just stop at that first frame and it won't play the rest. So just make sure that if that happens, the image still makes sense. All right, and footers. We got all the way down the email anatomy to the footer. I love footers. You're going to want to use a brand footer color, right, from the company palette for just email branding, right? It just gives it a really professional look, right? Or you could use a neutral gray. That whole spectrum neutral grays is great, like this example here, right? But essentially, this is where all your privacy laws, your contact information, copyright stuff will go. And you're going to want to use smaller but legible font still, between 10 to 12 pixels. And overall, the footer should not just be too distracting, right? But this is where your socials can go, your internal resources. And again, check the contrast in whatever background. If you are just coding out a footer and not using an image, check your contrast of the background color and the foreground text to make sure it passes. Anything more important should be upper and bring it up into the body of the email. It should not be in the footer. All right, so what webinar would be complete without mentioning AI, right? The key word here being enhance, right? Enhance design. I use AI, but sparingly, right? You can see on the next slide here some pros and cons. I mostly use AI. If in a pinch, I'll use it for images, like you saw the other one. It can give you decent images in a pinch if you prompt it well enough. But I would stay away from using AI images if you have images bespoke to the company, right? But again, it's great for, like, I use it for language stuff, right? So extending headlines, or if I already have a chunk of messaging, right? But I need it punched up. It doesn't sound well. Run it through AI and tell it how you would like to feel. It usually spits out something that's pretty good. The other great thing AI is used for is subject line suggestions, right? So our software at Polite Mail has a subject line suggester, AI based, and it's great. It gives great suggestions through that. So it's great for subject and preview text suggestions. The cons are pretty obvious though, right? It can get impersonal. It's pretty obvious it's coming from AI. It sounds robotic after a while. There's certain privacy concerns, right? If you're uploading internal content or employee information to Chat GPT. But overall, the outputs, again, are only as good as you, the communicator. So you're going to be reviewing them anyway. So you're the one who really knows how to communicate human to human, right? So I would just trust yourself in this.
All right. We've reached the end with a few minutes to spare. So I just want to reiterate some key takeaways from today. If you want employees to engage with your communications, it all starts with great email design. So keep your layout simple, scannable, mobile friendly, make sure they're accessible. Remember that content hierarchy that we talked about and lead with what's most important. Keep your design consistent. That will build trust and reinforce your brand, make your emails easy to read and take action, and test, measure, and use the data to refine your strategy. So another question we received, how to overcome the limits of a company-wide email tool that we must use for eBlast that has very limited design options. Well, Ian and his Pageworthy team provide custom template design services. So we could build those for you to upload into your tool, or you could use a tool like Polite Mail, which has a robust template designer if you want to build them yourself. And these are all of the resources we discussed on today's webinar. So you have access to those. All of the designs that we've shown in this webinar will be sent to you to reuse and brand for your communications. So you're getting 5 free templates. And as I just said, if you'd prefer to have this work done for you, Ian and our PageWorthy team are available to take these professional insights and put together customized templates for your team. So for more information, reach out to your account manager if you're a current customer, or respond to the follow-up email that we're going to be sending out soon if you're not a customer and you want more information. So I think we have 1 minute to answer questions. If we go over and you need to drop off, you'll have this recording again, but just want to answer these few questions real quick. Someone asked for a download with all of the best practices. Yes, we do have that we can send over to you, our best practices guide. We had a question, is it preferable to use stock images and illustrations and professional photographs versus designs created by graphic designers that all look very similar? What's your take on that, Ian?
I would say neither. Again, I would only use stock images when needed. You really want to find company-related, if possible, message-related images. Now, I know you always can't get those, but again, you can use AI, and AI is really good with that. And I would probably tend towards AI rather than stock images because you can really prompt AI to the messaging if you just can't get a tailored to your company image.
And then one other question. I'm seeing lots of beautiful multi-column emails, but remember in an earlier slide, it said that single columns are best for mobile readability. Relatedly, do you have a sense of the devices, specifically mobile percentage that folks are using to read those many billion emails you reviewed? So I'll answer that part.
Okay.
In our benchmark, we found that 89% of recipients viewed on desktop, 11% viewed on mobile devices.
Yeah, and of course that mobile device is only going to display on a single column, right? If it's optimized for mobile, that is. So if you design your email, your desktop email in a single column, that should be ready to go for a mobile display, but you'd have to use everything percentage based, if that makes sense. So again, any fixed width, a mobile is just going to use that same code and squish it in, right? But if you make everything fluid in the code and start your desktop that way in a single column, it should be fine. But yeah, when you're using those multiple columns, that's why I said earlier that you're still going to want to utilize media queries, which will essentially break those columns down on a mobile view. So yeah.
Yep. And Polite Mail will do that as well.
Right.
We'll resize for mobile display.
Yeah, if you're tracking your email through a software like Polite Mail, you don't even have to worry about it. You can design it however you want in desktop, and it will take care of the mobile responsiveness part.
Awesome. Well, that's all the questions that we've received. Again, if you have any further questions, we're going to be sending that follow-up email. Feel free to respond to that, and we'd be happy to answer them for you. And so thank you so much, Ian, for all of your insight today. And thank you all for attending and sticking with us. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.